Near the end of a September evening in 1779, a British warship lowered its colours within sight of the Yorkshire coast. The surrender should have been impossible. HMS Serapis was new, heavily armed and manned by a trained Royal Navy crew. Her opponent, the American ship Bonhomme Richard, was an aging former merchant vessel. Its hull was battered, its lower gun deck had failed early in the fight, and water was rising inside. Yet Serapis surrendered first. The question is not simply how John Paul Jones won a celebrated naval duel. It is how he transformed a battle he was losing at range into a fight his stronger opponent could no longer control. The answer lies in the condition of the ships, the decisions of their captains, the confusion of a multinational squadron, and Jones's willingness to gamble everything on closing the distance. The battle took place off Flamborough Head on September 23, 1779. Jones had brought a small Franco-American squadron into British home waters during the American Revolution. Captain Richard Pearson commanded the British escort. His immediate task was to protect a convoy of merchant ships carrying vital cargo from the Baltic toward Britain. Pearson did that part well. When danger appeared, he sent the convoy towards safety. Then he turned to face the Americans. By the time the guns fell silent, Bonhomme Richard would be beyond saving. Jones and his surviving men would have to abandon the ship that had carried them into battle. But the captured Serapis would sail away flying American colors. The victory did not decide the Revolutionary War. It did something more limited, but still important. It showed that British naval power could be challenged in the waters Britain considered its own. To understand why Jones was there, it helps to begin far from the Yorkshire cliffs on the Scottish shore of the Solway Firth. He was born John Paul in 1747, near Kirkbean in Kirkcudbrightshire, Scotland. His father worked as a gardener on the Arbigland estate. The family did not come from wealth or naval rank, but the sea was close, and ships moving through the Irish Sea offered a visible path beyond the life of an estate labourer. As a boy, John Paul went to Whitehaven, an English port across the Solway Firth. At about 13, he entered the merchant service. He crossed the Atlantic while still young, visited his older brother in Virginia, and learned the practical skills of a sailor: navigation, trade routes, ship handling, discipline, and the constant calculation of wind, tide, cargo, and risk. He rose quickly. By his early 20s, he had commanded merchant ships in the West Indies trade. He was capable and ambitious, but he also developed a reputation for harsh discipline. That reputation would follow him across the Atlantic. In Tobago in 1770, while commanding the merchant ship John, Paul ordered the flogging of the ship's carpenter, Mungo Maxwell. Maxwell complained about the punishment, and later died while serving aboard another vessel. The surviving records indicate that the Tobago Vice Admiralty Court dismissed the complaint. They do not support the simple version that Paul was tried after Maxwell's death. Still, the incident damaged his standing and revealed a pattern that would define much of his life. He demanded obedience, and he often made enemies while enforcing it. 3 years later, in Tobago, the danger became more serious. During a dispute that Paul described as a mutiny, he killed a crewman. He maintained that he had acted in self-defense. Rather than remain on the island to face an uncertain legal process, he left for the American colonies. When he reappeared in Virginia, he had adopted a new surname, Jones. No one can say with certainty why he chose it. Later accounts have linked the name to families who may have helped him, while others suggest that its very commonness made it useful. What is clear is that John Paul Jones arrived in America at a moment when reinvention was possible. Within 2 years, the colonies would be at war with the empire that had shaped his life at sea. The Revolution created an immediate problem for the Continental Congress. Britain possessed the world's most experienced navy, a force built on long service, established dockyards, global trade, and professional officers. The rebelling colonies had merchant vessels, coastal knowledge, and willing sailors, but they had almost no naval infrastructure. Their first warships were a small collection of purchased or converted vessels. Their officers had varying experience and uncertain authority. Jones saw opportunity in that weakness. In December 1775, Congress commissioned him a lieutenant in the Continental Navy. He served as first lieutenant aboard Alfred, one of the new service's first ships. From the beginning, he argued for aggressive operations. He did not believe the Americans could simply wait behind their harbors for British warships to appear. They had to threaten British commerce and force the Royal Navy to respond. Jones also believed he deserved more responsibility than he received. He had extensive merchant sea experience, yet he ranked below officers with stronger political connections. His letters to Congress were energetic, insistent, and sometimes abrasive. They did not make him easy to manage, but his results at sea gave his supporters an answer to the complaints of his rivals. In 1776, Jones received command of the continental sloop Providence. During a cruise lasting a little more than 6 weeks, he took a remarkable series of British prizes. Jones later claimed 16 captures. A contemporary report counted 13. The exact total remains uncertain, but the larger point does not. Providence disrupted British shipping and repeatedly escaped stronger pursuers. Jones had demonstrated that a small American cruiser, handled boldly, could impose costs far beyond its size. That success encouraged a larger idea. Jones wanted to carry the war at Yorkshire Atlantic. The proposal sounded reckless because it was. Britain had not faced a hostile seaborne raid on its own coast in generations. A single American ship crossing the ocean to operate around the British Isles would be exposed to the full reach of the Royal Navy. If discovered, it could be hunted down far from friendly support. Jones did not see that danger as a reason to stay home. He saw it as the reason to go. Late in 1777, he sailed the Continental Navy sloop Ranger from Portsmouth, New Hampshire, toward France. The voyage was difficult. The crew was restless, provisions were limited, and Jones's strict command style aggravated existing tensions. But Ranger reached France, where American diplomats were seeking military and financial help from the French government. Benjamin Franklin, serving as an American commissioner in Paris, became an important supporter. Franklin understood that Jones offered more than a few captured merchant ships. A successful American raider in European waters could embarrass Britain, excite French public opinion, and demonstrate that the rebellion was becoming an international conflict. France had begun aiding the American cause before entering the war openly. After the alliance of 1778, French support became central to the larger struggle. Jones now had Ranger, an 18-gun sloop, and a target he knew personally. Whitehaven was the port where he had first gone to sea. He knew its harbor and approaches. In April 1778, he sailed into the Irish Sea and prepared to strike the English coast. Overnight on April 22nd and 23rd, Jones sent armed parties ashore at Whitehaven. Their purpose was to disable the harbor's defenses and burn shipping. The raid did not produce the destruction Jones had hoped for. At least one ship was set alight, but the fire was extinguished before it spread through the harbor. Local residents responded, and the raiders withdrew. In material terms, the damage was limited. In psychological terms, it mattered greatly. Whitehaven's residents had assumed that the war was distant, taking place across an ocean. An American naval force had now landed on English soil. British newspapers reported the raid. Coastal communities worried about further attacks, and the Royal Navy had to devote attention to waters that had previously seemed secure. Jones did not linger. On April 23rd, a party from Ranger went ashore at St. Mary's Isle, the residence of the Earl of Selkirk in Scotland. Jones hoped to seize the Earl as leverage for better treatment of American prisoners held by Britain. The Earl was absent. Frustrated sailors took the family's silver plate. Jones later tried to distance himself from the looting. He arranged for the silver to be returned to the Countess of Selkirk after the war, accompanying it with an apology. The episode exposed an awkward contradiction in his campaign. He wanted the shock value of a raid and the bargaining power of a hostage, But he also wanted to present himself as an officer acting under national authority rather than as a pirate. The next evening, Ranger encountered HMS Drake off Carrickfergus, Ireland. Drake was a British sloop sent out to meet the intruder. Jones accepted the engagement. After a hard fight of roughly an hour, Drake surrendered. Ranger carried its prize back to France. The capture gave Jones the proof he needed. He had raided British territory, defeated a Royal Navy vessel in nearby waters, and returned to the continent with a prize. The British regarded him as a dangerous raider. Many Americans and Frenchmen saw him as evidence that audacity could compensate, at least occasionally, for naval weakness. Jones saw the campaign as only a beginning. He wanted a larger command and a more consequential mission. In early 1779, King Louis XVI of France provided him with the former French East India Company carved merchant vessel Duc de Duras. Jones refitted the ship for war and renamed it Bonhomme Richard, honoring Franklin's Poor Richard's Almanac. The new flagship was not new at all. It was a large, aging merchant vessel adapted for combat, and its condition caused concern. Bonhomme Richard carried a substantial battery, but its construction and armament did not make it the equal of a purpose-built British warship. The most troubling guns were old 18-pounders mounted low in the ship. They were powerful, but their reliability was questionable. Jones faced another problem before he met an enemy. His crew was drawn from many countries and backgrounds. Americans served alongside French, Irish, Portuguese, Scandinavian, and other sailors. Some had been prisoners of war. Many did not share a language, much less a common naval tradition. Jones drilled them hard, trying to create an effective fighting crew before the ship entered contested waters. His squadron was just as difficult to control. It included the Continental Frigate Alliance, the French frigate Pallas, and smaller accompanying vessels. Alliance was fast and well armed, but its captain, Pierre Landais, clashed repeatedly with Jones. Landais questioned Jones's authority and operated independently. A squadron can multiply a commander's strength only when its ships cooperate. Jones would go into the North Sea without that assurance. In August, the squadron began a cruise around the British Isles. It captured merchant vessels, disrupted trade, and forced British authorities to consider threats across a wide stretch of coast. The ships moved up the western side of Ireland, around northern Scotland, and into the North Sea. Autumn weather complicated communication and scattered the vessels at crucial moments. Jones considered attacking Leith, the port serving Edinburgh, but bad weather disrupted the attempt. The failure was important because it revealed the limits of his expedition. His ships could alarm the British coast, but they could not reliably assemble, land, and remain together under pressure. The squadron's greatest strength was uncertainty. British commanders could not know where Jones would appear. Its greatest weakness was that Jones often could not be sure where his own captains would be. By September 23rd, the crews had brought the squadron off Flamborough Head. There, Jones sighted a convoy of more than 40 merchant ships. It had come from the Baltic laden with goods and naval stores needed in Britain. The convoy had two escorts, HMS Serapis and the Countess of Scarborough, an armed vessel carrying about 20 guns. Serapis was the principal danger. She was a recently commissioned British fifth-rate warship carrying 44 guns. Captain Richard Pearson had a disciplined Royal Navy crew and a ship designed for the very work Bonhomme, Richard, had been converted to perform. Serapis was faster, stronger in construction, and armed with reliable heavy guns. In an open artillery exchange, Pearson had every advantage. Pearson's first responsibility was not to destroy Jones, it was to save the convoy. When he recognized the approaching force, he directed the merchant ships toward the safety of the coast. That decision prevented Jones from reaching his main target. It also left Pearson and the Countess of Scarborough to delay or defeat the American squadron long enough for the convoy to escape. Jones had a different problem. If he withdrew, the convoy would be gone, and the cruise's largest opportunity lost. If he attacked, he would be challenging a superior warship while his own squadron remained unreliable. The decision was not a clean choice between safety and danger. Jones had already accepted danger by bringing Bonhomme Richard into these waters. Now he had to decide whether that risk would produce anything. As evening settled over the Yorkshire coast, Bonhomme Richard and Serapis closed. The engagement began around 7 o'clock, with shore observers able to see flashes of gunfire against the darkness and the rising moon. The two captains initially fought in the conventional manner, attempting to use their broadsides while maneuvering for position. Almost immediately, Jones's central weakness became catastrophic. Two of Bonhomme Richard's old 18-pounder guns burst early in the battle. The explosions killed or injured members of their crews and damaged the ship from within. Jones had to abandon the lower gun deck, losing the heaviest part of his armament before the battle had properly developed. Serapis then punished Bonhomme Richard with repeated broadsides. British shot tore through the American ship's sides. Fires broke out. Water entered through damage near the waterline. The ship's rigging and masts suffered under the impact. Jones could still fight with lighter weapons, but at a distance he could not answer Pearson's guns on equal terms. This was the point at which the battle's central question became urgent. Jones could not win the artillery contest Pearson wanted. His only chance was to alter the kind of fight they were having. He ordered Bonhomme Richard closer. The decision was dangerous because a close approach exposed both ships to collision, boarding, fire, and entanglement. But it also reduced Serapis's advantages in maneuver and gunnery. Jones was not trying to outshoot Pearson from a favorable distance. He was trying to turn a naval duel into a locked, brutal struggle in which his crew could use muskets, grenades, small cannon, and sheer persistence. Wind and current brought the vessels together. Serapis's jib boom became tangled in Bonhomme Richard's rigging, and Jones's men used lines, grappling hooks, and lashings to hold the ships side by side. What had been a contest between moving warships became a fixed fight at almost point-blank range. The change did not make Bonhomme Richard safe, it made escape nearly impossible. But it forced Pearson to confront a new problem. His better ship was now trapped alongside an enemy whose decks, fighting tops, and gun ports were only yards away. Every advantage of range and handling mattered less. Damage to rigging, exposed gun crews, and fires on deck mattered more. For more than 3 hours, the crews fought in conditions that contemporaries found extraordinary even by the standards of naval warfare. Cannon fired directly into the opposing hull. Marines and sailors in the rigging fired down on the decks below. Hand grenades crossed the narrow gap between the vessels. Fires had to be fought while the battle continued. Men carried powder, loaded guns, treated wounded, and tried to keep water from overtaking the ships. The American crew's diverse background did not disappear in the crisis, but Jones's preparation now mattered. Sailors who had arrived with different languages and loyalties had a common task: keep Bonhomme Richard fighting long enough to break Serapis's resistance. The battle did not depend on a single dramatic action. It depended on scores of dangerous, repeated tasks performed while the ship beneath them was coming apart. One of the most consequential attacks came from above. Men in Bonhomme Richard's rigging were able to throw grenades onto Serapis. A grenade ignited cartridges that had been brought up for the British guns. The resulting explosion killed and wounded British sailors and disrupted Serapis's lower deck. It did not end the fight, but it added to Pearson's mounting losses and made it harder for his crew to restore order. At the same time, Jones received little dependable help from Alliance. Landays had spent much of the action maneuvering apart from the locked ships. When Alliance fired broadsides into the melee, some of its shot struck Bonhomme Richard as well as Serapis. Jones was fighting the British ship in front of him while trying to survive the actions of a nominal ally. The friendly fire made his position worse, but it also clarified the stakes. No organized relief was coming. Bonhomme Richard had to endure on its own. The ship's carpenter reported that the vessel was in grave danger of sinking. Pumps worked, but the damage below the waterline was severe. At one point, surrender was raised within Jones's own ship. Jones rejected it. The exact words exchanged between the two captains have become one of the most famous stories in American naval history, but the familiar quotation was recorded only decades later by a former officer, not in contemporary battle accounts. The later tradition attributes to Jones the words, "I have not yet begun to fight." Whether he used that precise phrase cannot be established from the best contemporary record. What can be established is more important than the legend. Jones refused to surrender while his ship was damaged, burning, and taking on water. He chose to continue the battle because the close-quarters struggle had given him a chance he would not have had in open water. Pearson faced a different calculation. He had protected the convoy, fulfilling his first duty, but Serapis had suffered heavily. The explosion on the gun deck had caused serious casualties. American fire from the rigging had made the upper decks dangerous. The mainmast was damaged, and Bonhomme Richard, improbably, still resisted. Pearson had to judge not only whether his ship could continue firing, but whether continued resistance would accomplish anything useful. Around 10:30 that night, after nearly 4 hours of combat, Pearson struck Serapis's colors. The British ship surrendered. The immediate victory belonged to Jones, but it came at a devastating cost. Bonhomme Richard was too badly damaged to preserve. Jones transferred wounded men and surviving crew members to Serapis during the night and the following morning. On September 25th, 2 days after the battle, Bonhomme Richard sank into the North Sea. The human cost was severe on both sides. Contemporary and later casualty totals do not always agree in detail, but scores of sailors were killed or wounded aboard the opposing ships. The uncertainty in the figures should not obscure what they represent. This was not a clean triumph won by a brilliant maneuver alone. It was a prolonged fight in which ordinary sailors endured gunfire, fire, flooding, explosions, and the collapse of the vessel meant to carry them home. Pallas separately captured the Countess of Scarborough, completing the dispersal of Pearson's escort force. But Jones's prize was the larger story. He had lost his own flagship and gained a British warship. From a narrow material perspective, the exchange was costly. From a political and symbolic perspective, it was an American victory of enormous value. The location magnified the effect. The battle had occurred close enough to the English coast for people ashore to witness its flashes and hear its guns. Britain had built its security on naval power. Now one of its warships had surrendered off Yorkshire to a force led by a man the British press often described as a pirate. The humiliation was sharpened by the fact that Pearson had acted courageously and had successfully saved the convoy. British authorities did not treat Pearson as a coward. King George III later knighted him for his conduct in the action. That recognition captured the battle's complexity. Pearson had not failed through inexperience or neglect. He had protected the merchant ships assigned to him. But he had lost Serapis after Jones changed the terms of the fight. Jones brought the captured ship and his prizes to Texel in the Dutch Republic, where victory turned into a diplomatic problem. Britain demanded that the Dutch, who were neutral, treat Jones as a pirate and hand over the captured ships. The Dutch government wanted to avoid a confrontation with Britain while also managing the presence of French and American interests in its port. For weeks, Jones was caught in negotiations he could not control. Franklin and French officials worked to protect him and the prizes. The episode was another reminder that naval success depended on more than courage at sea. A commander could win a battle and still be constrained by neutral ports, international law, and the politics of allies. When Jones reached France, he was celebrated. Franklin praised his daring, and Louis XVI honored him with a gold-hilted sword and admission to the French Order of Military Merit. Portraits, songs, and public admiration made Jones one of the best-known American officers in Europe. His fame was genuine, but it was also unstable. It depended on a victory that could be retold more easily than the difficult years that followed. The United States Congress also recognized his service. It awarded him a gold medal, the only one Congress gave to a Continental Navy officer during the Revolution. Jones was later assigned to command America. a 74-gun ship of the line under construction in Portsmouth, New Hampshire. It promised the major command he had spent years seeking. He never received it. Before Jones could take the ship to sea, Congress transferred America to France as a diplomatic gift. The decision made strategic sense within the alliance. But for Jones, it was another personal disappointment. He had become famous for winning with inadequate ships. Yet the powerful vessel he had hoped to command passed from his hands before he could sail her. After the war, the Continental Navy was disbanded. Jones had no settled role in the new republic. He continued to seek employment and to advocate for naval strength. But peacetime offered few opportunities for an officer whose talents had been shaped by crisis. Fame gave him recognition, not a permanent command. In 1788, he accepted a Russian commission and traveled to serve Empress Catherine the Great in the war against the Ottoman Empire. He held the rank of Rear Admiral and served in the Black Sea Theatre. The assignment quickly became entangled in court politics, rival foreign officers, and competing claims of credit. One of his principal rivals was Prince Charles of Nassau-Siegen. Jones had never been skilled at making himself politically safe. In Russia, that weakness was costly. Accusations and intrigue surrounded him, and he was eventually recalled. He left embittered, convinced that others had taken credit for his service and damaged his reputation. The pattern was familiar. He could impose his will in battle, but he could not command the institutions and alliances around him. He returned to Paris, a city that had once treated him as a hero. By 1790, France was in revolution, and the world that had celebrated an American naval raider had changed. Jones's health declined. He lived increasingly alone in a modest apartment, still writing and still concerned with the recognition he believed his career deserved. On July 18, 1792, John Paul Jones was found dead in Paris. He was 45 years old. The likely cause was kidney disease, possibly compounded by pneumonia. His body was preserved and placed in a lead coffin in a Protestant cemetery. Over time, the cemetery was sold, developed, and nearly erased from public memory. The location of Jones's grave was lost for more than a century. The man whose name had become inseparable from the early American Navy lay beneath a changing Paris neighborhood, far from Scotland, Virginia, France, and the North Sea where he had made his name. In 1905, Horace Porter, the American ambassador to France, completed a long search for Jones's remains. Porter spent years examining old records and arranging excavations beneath later construction. Investigators found a lead coffin, and the preserved remains were identified through comparison with a sculpted bust made during Jones's lifetime. President Theodore Roosevelt sent American warships to bring the coffin home. Jones was reburied at the United States Naval Academy in Annapolis, Maryland, in an elaborate crypt beneath the Academy Chapel. The ceremony gave him the national recognition that had eluded him in life. That final honor can make John Paul Jones seem inevitable, a founder of American naval tradition, permanently fixed in public memory. His actual life was much less certain. He began as a Scottish merchant sailor, fled a killing in the Caribbean, and entered a navy that barely existed. He fought political rivals, unreliable allies, weak ships, foreign governments, and the limits of his own temperament. At Flamborough Head, his victory did not come from a magical phrase or a single burst of courage. It came because he recognized that Bonhomme Richard could not survive the battle Pearson had chosen. By closing, grappling, and refusing to let the ships separate, he made the superior Serapis fight under new conditions. His crew's endurance, British damage, and Pearson's accumulating tactical problems then made surrender possible. That is why the battle endured. It did not prove that weaker forces always defeat stronger ones. It showed that an inferior force can sometimes survive by changing the problem its opponent expects to solve. In 1779, off the coast of Britain, John Paul Jones turned a failing ship into a weapon long enough to make the Royal Navy yield. The ship went down. The memory of the decision did not.